There's now a way to contact the Wolf Connection podcast. Send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Calfa. Let's talk about some wolves. Hi, everyone. So Stephen came up with this great idea that we're trying this out for the first time, and we're going to do a little bit of a recap of some of the episodes that have really stuck with us. We've gotten some great feedback from listeners and people who have downloaded the podcast, and we want to give you some of the basics of, not even the basics, but what's happening in the wolf world. There has been a lot of movement in some of the hunts that have been going on, and just want to spotlight some of that stuff. And by the way, we're looking for a name to really call this, and we haven't figured it out yet since we're doing this for the first time. So if anybody has any ideas or thoughts, send in your votes. Absolutely. And let us know what you think we should call this, hopefully by the next time we do this. But we're trying to make this a maybe monthly, every 5 or 6 episodes or so, where we go in and we recap and give you all some ideas of if what you're interested in and you want to go through, because we do have a vast library now of wolf content that you guys want to go through. So,
and cool stuff on the way too. So we want to make sure
absolutely. We want you guys to make sure that you have the most pertinent and up-to-date information. The first thing I do want to mention before we dive into this and go through this is, I know there are a lot of you who we've interviewed who know about the passing of Pat Jennings, Wolfman Pat, the Wolfmobile, all those incredible stories that he and his daughter shared. We interviewed him on our podcast. I believe it was back in September or so, right before he had a surgery, and then he went through a little bit more radiation. So unfortunately, he passed in the middle of January, and he will be sorely missed. I had the pleasure of actually meeting him. He came to Wolf Connection. He had an incredible bond with me at one of our wolves up there, and his daughter Kristen and his family. We've sent our condolences, and we continue to send strength and love and light and everything to them, because it's you can feel the loss of Pat, but we know that he's still here and he's still in the wolf community. And for all of those who haven't heard of Pat before or don't understand what we're talking about, just if you go on our website, if you go on our podcast and you see his episode with his daughter, it's really an incredible experience to listen to them talk about stories, talk about how he got started. And it's just something I think if you're an avid wolf watcher or want to become a wolf watcher, it's actually episode 51, and it's called a wolf watching family. So it's Pat Jennings and Kristen Parks. So again, it's really an homage to him, and really to listen to him really describe the wonderful things that he was able to see and witness. He sent me a wolf calendar that he made himself for Christmas, and so that's hanging up in my workstation here at my own home. So just please, go listen to that episode, and you'll feel just the incredible, the energy that's emitted from him and his daughter and the family that they are. So again, just to recognize that Pat is, he's no longer with us, but he's definitely with us in spirit, in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll second that. Condolences to his family. And just the thing that sticks with me is what an inspiration it is to hear, a father sort of just instilling this incredible passion for animals into his daughter, just through his pure enjoyment of watching and observing, and just this wholesome love for this animal, that without being able to touch this animal or be in close quarters with this animal I assume until he came to Wolf Connection, he just had this, unbending commitment he will definitely be missed, and you should absolutely go check out that podcast. And I think it's one of his last sort of public appearances, I think, as far as we heard. And so I think it's an important culmination of Pat Jennings and what his passion meant to him and his family.
I absolutely agree. So you guys listen to that, and send your email us and send us your thoughts on that one. If you give it a listen and you have a story that resonates with you or something that comes up, we're always welcome to hear that. And that's a lot of what this is about. So a lot of what Stephen and I are going to go into now, as I have my trusty mug that Stephen gave me for Christmas. I have none of you can see it, but it says, always be yourself, except if you can be a wolf, then always be a wolf. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. So
I think that's all we do. That's all I think that's all I've bought you guys in like the last several years.
It's just wolf. I mean, why not? I mean, let's be honest.
Same with you guys. I think you've sent me a bunch
We have, and that's what we do is we send little trinkets. And these are all things that we need to have to reinforce our commitment, I guess. So, Stephen, go ahead and let me know. So, Stephen, like I said, has compiled a lot of these articles, and we're going to reference the episodes which we think will really give you some background on this. So, the first one, Stephen, go ahead and tell everyone. I think this was from the Billings Gazette, and I believe we spoke about Tom McNamee with this article a little bit, right?
Yeah, and by the way, the Billings Gazette is a really cool resource for anything wolf-related or Yellowstone-related. Definitely worth checking out. And right now they have I think it's $1 for 6 months. You can subscribe to it. I don't know how many of the articles you can read for free before you have to subscribe, but it's fairly cheap. And if you're interested, it's a fairly good resource. So yeah, I looked through a bunch of articles, tried to sort of intertwine them, and we'll somehow make them relevant to some of the episodes and guests we've talked to. Again, this is our first time doing this type of breakdown summary episode, so forgive us if it seems a little on the fly. It is, but as always, we'll get used to it and figure it out. But so I'm going to treat my part of this as sort of a breakdown of current just wolf news, right? And I don't know exactly how to do it. Maybe I should do a news voice too. First thing is, many of you probably already know. If you listen to our podcast, you definitely know. There has been a lot of conversation about the loosening of hunting management in some of the western states, and also how that's maybe promoting the idea of relisting. Whether it'll be successful or not, who really knows? But this blurb from the Billings Gazette says 15 wolves were shot after roaming across the park's northern border in Montana, according to figures released to the Associated Press. 5 more died in Idaho and Wyoming. It also says that statewide, 184 wolves have been killed, which they say remains on par with previous seasons. There are more than 1,000 wolves estimated to occupy the state. So if I'm reading that right, it sounds like even with the new approach to hunting, the loosening approach to hunting, that the count doesn't look much different from previous years. And I guess that kind of makes sense, right? Because maybe that's due to the difficulty of wolf hunting just in general. I mean, wolves don't know about the quotas, right? So they're as hard as they've ever been to hunt. And potentially, even with loosening regulations, that does not mean that people will be more
successful in getting them. Yeah,
more successful. It doesn't mean that. I think probably they will be to a degree, but it sounds like wolves are they're very hard to hunt and they hang out in really tough country. So it doesn't look like the numbers are that they're on par with previous years, is what I'm hearing. And Doug Smith did make a comment on this in a science.org article where he is saying the loss of the Yellowstone wolves is a huge setback. Researchers will do what we can to keep the science going with what we have left. So that's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, taxpayer dollars, and lots of development. And they're watching it sort of dwindle away after, years and years of really hard work.
I think
and it's definitely something we'll be covering
I think, Stephen, to your point, what I think is what's driving a lot of this is the fact that we've had collared and Yellowstone wolves that are being lured out of the park.
Yeah, and it's way more Yellowstone wolves without a doubt. Yeah.
Right. And I think that is where there's a lot of that, because as we'll get into this also, and Stephen has done a great job of putting this all together, is it coincides with, we've spoken with the likes of Dan Vermillion, who it was the Montana Fish and Wildlife, and Tom McNamee. So this is where we get into the tourism aspect, and this is where
that's my next thing.
Right. So and I'm tossing the softball for Stephen to knock out, and so this is where those are two episodes if you want to go back and listen to the tourism impact and the business impact. And there was an article that we read through or did some research on with Tom McNamee about really how these businesses are forming a coalition and really understanding and trying to have their voices heard as small businesses or big businesses in these areas, that this is hurting their bottom line. And that they're dependent upon tourism, visitors in the park, people staying for Airbnbs, people staying for week-long vacations, whatever it may be, taking trips across the country to come to a place like this. And so that's where a lot of the rubber meets the road in a lot of these things. And I believe in that article, tell me if I'm wrong there, Stephen, is that they are ending the wolf hunt in Southwest Montana, which is, I think, Region 3 or where they're almost at whatever the quote is, or they're going to stop at a certain amount, right? I think 82.
So in Region 3, they're ending the quota at 82 wolves. So as of Friday, 76 wolves have been killed in that region. So you got another 6 more before, 6 more successfully hunted wolves means the end of the season. So whenever it hits 82, that's what they've decided on. And like you were saying, there has been a lot of outrage from local Yellowstone businesses. And that's where the numbers become complicated, because even though in total it looks like it's essentially on par with previous years as far as harvest numbers, last year only 2 wolves were taken from the 2 districts along Yellowstone's northern border. But this year it's 18 out of the 76 that were taken. So there's a huge impact to what this particular article calls essential supply, meaning what you're saying, which is wolves are really why most people are coming to Yellowstone. So naturally these businesses are going to take a hit. Apparently people spend something like $40 million a year to come see wolves, and 3 to 4 million Yellowstone guests, they spend in the neighborhood, I think I read it was not like 390 million or something in the surrounding businesses. So Yellowstone tourism is a huge deal. And for job creation in those surrounding towns, which, in small mountain towns, that is a challenge generally.
Right. And I think that's where we try to, and listen, we will continue to always be on the side of radical middle and listening to both sides. That's always what we're doing. And this is really just a recap, though, of giving you all the facts of what is happening, and I think highlighting in these smaller towns and smaller areas. And we want to shed light on it so that you all have the information and you know where to go to find the articles and the information on the ground of where these acts are happening. So you know where if you want your voice to be heard and you want to act that way, or so you have resources that go both ways. So I think that's really, again, part of what we're doing here as well.
Yeah, and I know there was a request to cease hunting along the border of the park. And I guess that's a tricky one, right? Because within the park, animals have special protections. I think it's a hard sell to say, well, now also out of the park, they get special protections because they are in the park sometimes. So I think that was a hard sell, and I believe that was declined. The request to cease hunting along the border of the park was declined, and the new laws actually order wildlife managers to reduce the population. So it's an actual order now. They have to expend efforts to actually reduce the population. It's an order. It's something that it's a requirement that the commission does, in fact, reduce the population. And I think this is, like we've heard in past episodes, a response to that original number of wolves set at the early meetings. And I think it was said to be set at 150. So now the goal is to get closer to 150. Now there's like 1,100 in the state of Montana. But I did read something where a rep from FWP says that actually the original agreement was not that would be a maximum, right? It was that they would not go below 150 wolves. So that was the minimum. It doesn't say anything about the potential. It just says we will not have less than 150 wolves on the landscape. So it kind of murkies the waters there on whether the promise was 150 or the promise of the bare minimum was 150, and that makes a big difference. But either way, Montana is going to try. I mean, obviously, I don't know if they can succeed at that number using conventional and legal methods. I mean, that's an insane decrease by the time. I mean, I don't think that's possible. But they're trying. They're going to try, obviously, to bring down the population significantly. So that's where they're at.
Right. And I think for any of those of you that are looking for Yellowstone specific episodes so that you guys can get an idea, and he highlighted the scientists and the biologists that are doing this awesome work in there. So for those of you, I know we've gotten, I think, an email inquiry or two at talking about, can you guys do some Yellowstone episodes? And if you've latched onto the podcast later on in the game, we actually did a whole series of biologists before we went to Yellowstone, and then we did our own Yellowstone recap. So if you guys go back in the catalog, if you look at episode 39 and 40, that's our own Yellowstone recap when we went to the park itself. And before that, that's where you can listen to the Carter Niemeyer. We talked with Maddie Jackson, Taylor Bland, Jack Raby, Dylan Sanborn, Nathan Varley. These are all Jeremy Sundaraj. Jim Halfpenny. These are all Rick McIntyre. These are all individuals that have, for the better part, some for decades and others for a shorter period of time as of right now, are working in the park and getting the data and the information out to the scientific community. They're watching these wolves, they're collaring these wolves, they're making sure all the data is up to date with Doug Smith. Doug, we're hoping we can get you on sooner than later. I'll put that out there in the universe. I know
it's in the works. It's
in the works. It's going to happen. So we're going to have Doug on eventually. So Rick Lamplew, by the way, he was an author and he's a huge advocate of wolves. If you some of his books, if you look him up, his last name is spelled Lamplugh. Look him up and read some of his books. So those are episodes, if you go back in the catalog earlier, that you're able to listen to the techniques that they're using to get all this data and make sure that the wolves stay safe in the park and are able to thrive inside there. So those are ones to look at.
Yeah, and speaking of Jim Halfpenny, I was reading an article that he was included in when I was sort of just doing general research on the impact of wolves to two of the main industries that we have mentioned millions of times on our podcast that are affected negatively by wolves, which is outfitters, right? Hunting outfitters and ranchers. And the question is, in terms of outfitters, how much of that elk decline is wolf related? And I was, like I said, to mention Jim Halfpenny, on YellowstonePark.com, he says he acknowledged that hunting-oriented outfitters have suffered from a decline in elk population. But he attributes that to three different processes. One is extreme drought, which a lot of us in the West are very familiar with now, excessive hunting removal of female elk or cows, and also predation by carnivores, which includes wolves. He added that the decline in elk numbers is ecosystem-wide and not just at the northern end of the GYE, the Greater Yellowstone area, where most wolves reside. So the question is, are ungulates having a widespread problem, and what is it? And are wolves really, that incredibly impactful to those numbers? I mean, I did read somewhere that outfitting in Montana has something like a $1.3 billion economic output and creates about 16,000 jobs. So that's a huge industry in Montana, and a group that definitely has important perspective. Also from that science.org article, though, with a quote from Daniel McNulty, they illustrate a bit of conflict in objectives here, which I have to admit is hard to process. But apparently Montana wants to reduce elk numbers from about 142,000 to 92,000. But they've also embraced killing a predator that could help them achieve that goal. Their management objectives, McNulty notes, are at cross purposes. So wolves certainly do kill elk, and they definitely change how they use the landscape. And that we've heard before, and it's definitely worth mentioning that killing elk and moving elk may seem very similar to someone observing elk. They aren't where they used to be, and they don't behave like they used to behave, and that's the reality. But it's important to know that they are both happening. So the reality can inform our conservation and management decisions.
Yeah, I think that's something, you brought up some great points in those articles, and we have discussed this at length. I will mention, if you want to find out more about before I respond to what you were saying, Stephen, the Nathan Varley episode is huge in understanding the wolf-elk relationship. So if you find that one, I believe it's episode 25, Nathan Varley goes into extreme detail about the coexistence and the relationship that wolf and elk have. And it's really one that I think all of us, need to really understand. And what I will say on that, Stephen, is that you and I have really, excuse me again, I have these allergies are killing me, is that we have to find this balance of understanding everyone has a right to make a living and do it in a way that doesn't impact the natural landscape as much as possible. We have discussed with a couple of former hunters and current hunters that understand that elk, due to the reintroduction of an apex predator that was off the landscape for nearly 100 years, for that to come back, it's going to have, I think, those elk revert to their natural wild instinct of, we're going to make it harder for this apex predator, and in turn, humans be able to find it and hunt it successfully. So there's an adaptation that has to happen, or is trying to happen, and it's not easy. It's a learning curve, and I don't, by any means, I don't understand and know how that feels, or the steps that have to be taken in order for that to happen for outfitters and for people that take clients out to go and try and successfully kill, whatever it is, a moose or an elk. So these are things that obviously we're learning as we go. And the introduction process, in all fairness, has only been, a shade under 30 years. So it's pretty recent. So there's a lot of new stuff that we're still trying to figure out, I think, throughout this whole process.
Right.
And we've talked about this management style, or these management ways of trying to impact the ungulate populations. And this includes bison, this includes moose, this includes, because we've covered many sections of North America, that it's not just elk. We're talking about, when we spoke to Bob Hayes about the Yukon, you're talking about the caribou populations and the moose populations, and how there are populations of people up there that rely on those ungulates to feed their families. And so it's such a delicate balance that we're trying to strike. And it all goes back really to what, the 3 or 4 articles that Stephen was pointing out before, is that I think if we all take a step back and we look at it, these hunts on certain predators or prey is going to shift the ecological system in a way that it is going to throw it out of balance. And we've had people say this on our podcast, and have expressed concern in a way that it's not a good idea to go at it emotionally. And logically and scientific based is more the way I think that we need to come together, but also hear out everyone on every side, so that we have this conversation that we say, okay, if we want to put a limit on X population, instead of swinging severely in one direction, that's where we're going to have the conflict, both and really in the human sphere as opposed to the natural sphere. Remember, wolves, elk, they have no idea that we're talking about them, that we're having these discussions. They're just out living their lives. And so when a lot of times I feel when humans, we put ourselves into a situation that we don't, we understand some, but not all aspects about it. And as Stephen said, sometimes we throw caution to the wind and think, well, if we do this, it will be fine. And we're not necessarily sure about that due to climate change, due to the climate shifting. I know, we have to be middle with that, I guess. But due to the climate shifting, and we've all experienced something. I know I'm in California, Stephen's in Colorado. The drought is a big deal. When you talk to people who are looking at the ecological side of this, these animals, these species are going to shift the way that they do things in order to survive. And so a lot of that has to be taken into account. And with you being in Colorado, Stephen, too, you're seeing, because now we're under a year for the reintroduction happening on the west slope. So this is something also that we've detailed a little bit. Yeah, I know it came up really fast. I mean, we did the first couple of interviews in Colorado, I think in 21, and we were like, okay, by 23, this is going to happen. And so we're on the verge now of another reintroduction. And really, from all accounts that we've spoken to, this is, if successful, this is the unification of the species and the population, basically from Canada all the way down to the Southwest, with the gray wolf, with the Mexican gray wolf population that is severely endangered and probably in need of some sort of help in that way. I know biologists and zoos and sanctuaries are doing all they can to keep that population alive, but this is really the bridge, what some biologists say, to really help that population have a good amount of their normal range or their wild range back.
Yeah. And actually, some of the things you're just mentioning are a good segue into just some points about the rancher community as well. I doubt it's evenly split based on what we've heard, but there are definitely ranchers who support the introduction of wolves. They just want to be prepared for what's to come. And there are definitely ranchers who would rather not. And, ranchers have a lot of challenges to success right now. And I imagine it's only going to get harder in the future to be a rancher. I think, definitely the statistic is thrown out there quite often that wolves kill, it's less than 1% of cattle in America, basically. The sort of nuanced perspective of ranchers is that it's the indirect effects of wolves that is really their economic killer. So in Beef Magazine, there's an article illustrating the secondary effects like disruption of grazing. You can imagine cattle grazing and what makes them big. I mean, there's a pressure. I think there's a pressure amongst, modern cattlemen to make big cows, right? For obvious reasons, pounds equals dollars. So there's this disruption of grazing, calf depredation, and overall weight loss has been reported in a lot of cases, and in some cases injuries that were not fatal but make cows unfit for sale. So there's more than just the obvious depredations, right? That are going to be challenging. And it seems like what's happening is, based on the numbers, overall wolves don't have a massive impact on cattle numbers, like as a whole. But based on location, the reality is they're going to disproportionately target certain herds, right? So certain ranchers are going to have continuous problems, and some may not have any at all. So the numbers are low, but for some ranchers, the effects are going to be high. So, whether it's enough to be informing conservation for the next several generations, I don't really know. I personally believe that, my thought process is that we need to correct this heavy-handed mistake, right, that we made in the 1900s. I mean, sending an animal close to extinction is not really something we can consciously do and be at peace with. And I think it's very symbolic to correct that mistake. And I think it's important socially as well. But the reality is there are going to be challenges. So when I read this, my question was, all right, without wolves, what else do ranchers have issues with in terms of mortality? How do they compare? In some places, definitely lions and bears have an impact, particularly on calves. But I didn't know this, but I was reading, article after article is just talking about how damaging coyotes are to cattle. I would have expected some, but I think it's essentially the leading death amongst predator-related death loss in cattle, and the leading death rate, the highest percentage of deaths in cattle overall due to non-predators is respiratory problems. So I guess bovine respiratory disease, I think that's what they're talking about, and I'm not sure that affects free-ranging cattle like it does cattle in feedlots, but it's definitely the biggest factor. And things like public perception is changing. That's a big challenge to cattle producers. Fake meat, the meat, laboratory meat that's I think is a genuine possibility in the near future is absolutely something I think cattle ranchers are trying to figure out what to do about. So they are faced with a lot of challenges in their industry, and I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that wolves are at the high end of that spectrum, but I think maybe they feel like it might be the nail in the coffin, for lack of better words, and you have to feel for them on that point as well.
No, and we do have to recognize that it's not an easy life. I'm trying not to project because I don't know the first thing about ranching. So if there are ranchers out there who are listening to this, I do not know what goes into your daily life. And I can only imagine the amount of things you are dealing with on a regular basis to make sure that your herd is safe, your families are fed, and dealing with other regulatory issues with beef prices staying the same for you, and then the meat packing industry taking the profit away from you as a rancher. So there are so many different factors in this situation. And I know we talk about wolves on this podcast, but it's really the connection that this specific species has on the greater population, and that it's a symbol for certain. It's a symbol of certain things for certain people, and this is always the conversation that we try to engage and have, and that we understand the need to have individuals out here in the western part of the United States have this land and be able to keep, Stephen has said this multiple times, to keep the West wild, quote unquote, so that there isn't this huge boom of special interest, right?
Land,
Exactly. We can't have that. If we want to have if you want to have a Yellowstone or any sort of these wild places that people can go to in the national forests, or just looking out over these beautiful scenery places. Yeah. These are the individuals on the front line that are dealing with this all the time. Right. And so there need, again, I know I say it ad nauseum sometimes, but it's true, is we need to meet in the middle to find out ways that we can help everyone on all sides have a coexistence measure. And I think, again, to that end, if you're looking for people who are doing their damnedest to really make these things happen, listen to Karen Vardaman, listen to Kurt Holtzen, who works for Lava Lake Lamb. Just recently, I don't think I even told Steven this, Vicente Palacios, who we interviewed from Spain, who works with Iberian wolves, had mentioned to us on the podcast, I'd love to be connected with Kurt, because Kurt is working on coexistence measures with sheep and lambs. And so I made the introduction. I hope, Kurt or Vicente, if you guys are listening, hopefully, I know Kurt responded and said, I'd love to talk about this. So hopefully they're having that discussion. And these are the tools and the management styles that we have to promote, that we have to say, there are people globally that are trying to make this situation work. And I think, again, Stephen, that's a great article. And where did you find that again? That was Beef Magazine?
Beef Magazine. Yeah, they have some great stuff about just cattle farming in general, like the future of beef, challenges facing the modern American rancher. And of course, like I said, it is hard in this type of research to find articles that make the distinction between feedlot cattle and free grazing cattle, like on BLM. And I think that's important. I just can't find a major distinction amongst the research. And maybe that's just because it doesn't, I mean, I don't know if it matters, maybe it doesn't matter, but most of these statistics, well, I think most cows, most cows out of the West are feedlot cattle, cattle, at least most of them, I would assume. I don't really know that for a fact, but yeah, it would be nice to see some more research about cattle loss or mortality amongst cattle that are free grazing, very distinct subgroup away from feedlot cattle in terms of research. So if anyone has any resources about that, that'd be an interesting thing to look at. Just a very specific study on free grazing cattle. It was mildly challenging for me to find articles that make the distinction for some reason. But Beef Magazine, some good
Beef
stuff.
Magazine, yeah, check that stuff out. And obviously I mean, if you want to get the perspective of an individual who was basically, he was he went in and helped with the wolf reintroduction, but also was there to really dissect whether cattle, cows, sheep were being depredated upon by wolves in these areas. Listen to Carter Niemeyer, read his books. And again, give us, we have our email, podcast@wolfconnection.org. Please email us if you guys have any questions about anything that Steve and I are talking about right now that you weren't sure about, or where can I find more information? We've had some great feedback from some of you, some from across the pond, some of you here in the States that are asking us questions and giving us ideas. And we can't thank you all enough for being engaging in this conversation. I think that was the hope and the dream of what we wanted to start. And it's moving in that direction. So we can't thank you enough. So if you guys have any questions of anything that we're talking about, or you're not sure about the articles or what episode to listen to or how to get in contact with these individuals, we'd be happy to give you that information. And again, really just keep having the conversation. That's always what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and we're obviously going to continue with the Montana, Wyoming, Idaho discussions because they're definitely going to, I think there's just too much momentum in the topic for them not to evolve in some dramatic way soon. I don't really know, I don't really know how. Maybe it will yield relisting and special protections or it won't, but it's definitely going to spark more conversation, and that's going to be really interesting. And then obviously our next, aside from that topic, our next focus is going to be on Colorado news because, I mean, what a once in a lifetime thing to just be observing and experiencing, which is, a state, no wolves, and they're going to be reintroduced the next year. And we could do it completely differently. We could see it pan out almost identical to Montana. We don't really know, but it's fascinating either way. And all I can say is I'm seeing a lot of conversation from folks writing articles, trying to pull information from Montana, pull inspiration from Montana to make some kind of prediction of how this is going to pan out. There has already been a few attacks on cattle in the northern parts of the state of Colorado. So I don't know. Is it going to look similar in terms of split perceptions, or with all this lead in time, is there going to be a bit more predictability and therefore a bit more preparation, acceptance, and participation and listening amongst local government and ranchers, hunters, wolf lovers, and everybody in between. But that's what I hope to see, is at least more conversation, better conversation, more balanced reporting on things like this, because it's so easy. It's so easy to just report in a balanced way about this type of stuff because all the information's out there. Everyone has an intention that is a reflection of their lifestyle, and we need to respect those differences. But it's so easy just to see the reality from everybody's point of view because it's very just out there and readily available. So hopefully the reporting reflects that. And even though we are going to go through with the reintroduction and we have all this lead up time, will it look different than Montana? I don't really know, but I hope to see that it at least looks a little bit more, I don't know, we at least look a little bit more prepared.
Yeah. I think on that note too, what I want to mention to those of you is that if you want to get more information, we have done, I believe we've definitely done 2 podcasts specific to Colorado. So if you listen to Delia Malone, she is, I believe, hang on one second as I get the information here. So she's the wildlife chair for the Sierra Club Colorado chapter. And she's an ecologist with the Colorado Natural Heritage Program. So she was on a while back. She was talking about this, and also Mike Phillips. I'm sure, if you hear the name, but Mike Phillips talked in depth about the Colorado wolf reintroduction. So those are 2 vital pieces of information that we went and spoke to them about. And they really delved into really into the nuts and bolts of what they're trying to happen. Those episodes, believe it or not, are going to be almost a year old, where I'm trying to reconnect with Mike and see if I can get him back on. Also another one, just for an update. Speaking of that, our next, what we like to do also with this type of back and forth with Stephen and I, is to let you know what's coming up. So, excuse me again. So what's coming up is we're gonna have another international guest, Hannah Peterson. She's done a lot of research with wolf and human coexistence in Europe. So she will be on the podcast sooner than later. And actually, Stephen reached out, and I don't know if any of you who are in Colorado have heard of the Colorado Howl or Colorado Howl. What's it's the radio station, right?
Yeah,
Stephen?
Yeah, the Colorado Howl. Yep. Oh, let me find the. You can keep talking about that one, and I will find.
So Colorado Howl is going to be on here. They will be talking all things reintroduction.
KDUR Durango.
So you guys will be able to hear more of those perspectives. So those are some of the things that are coming up. I'm reaching out to a few more authors, so we're going to have a lot of new and interesting perspectives coming through. I think we're still going to figure out, how to have this conversation, and we're doing this on the fly, and this was good. And I think one thing we didn't mention, Stephen, was I believe the federal government is going to do a 12-month review on wolf hunting or the wolf population. Do you happen to have the article up or what they're doing?
Was that one of the ones I sent you?
I'm not sure. I know.
You said a 12-year review?
Yeah. Biden administration says wolves may need protections after states expand hunting. This is old, though. This was September 15th. I thought I saw something earlier. That was NPR. There was something. Hang on one second.
Also, while John looks for that, the Colorado Howl, their Instagram is the Colorado Howl, but they always have, really cool articles. They always have really cool articles up there. You should follow them on Instagram and just check out some of the stuff that they are posting. It's very, very nuanced stuff. They have a lot of stuff, but Colorado officials should urgently address recent wolf kills on livestock. Officials help Colorado rancher put up fencing to protect cattle from wolves. The wolves are coming. Can Coloradans meet them on common ground? These are just some of the titles of the articles they've been posting, and it seems really just like balanced news, and that's really refreshing to see. So there's some cool stuff in there. I've definitely learned a lot from them, from that page. And, this was my first time this is my final thought, but this was my first time doing this deep dive on this type of research. Oddly, I mean, honestly, we started this podcast and we just wanted to let the guests speak for themselves, and you know, we just wanted to see what was out there, to see what the conflict is, to see, you know, who these people are, both supporters and folks that would rather not see wolves reintroduced at all. And we just wanted to see what was out there. We were just trying to get the information and to share it with everybody. But we were learning episode by episode, right? And this was the first time I really did a ton of reading on the statistics, and then bouncing those statistics off other statistics. Let me just tell you what, this is so kind of complicated. There are so many factors in this conversation, and, you know, our guests have definitely honored that, but it's amazing how many things I see online that just don't honor the complexity of this scenario. It's so complicated. I mean, we talk about the tourism value of wolves, and that's absolutely true. But the two industries most affected by wolves have an insane economic value. Insane. So all three of the parties kind of included in the primary conversation have incredible economic value. They have incredible social value. They're all important to our traditions and to our history. You know, we talked about Pat Jennings and his daughter and how beautiful that relationship was, where he gets to pass that on to his kids. And all three of these industries have that in common: fathers and mothers passing on traditions down to their children. And it all is kind of beautiful in a way, right? And in a lot of ways, it can all work together. All of these people are important. All these groups are important. And sometimes it's diluted down to this very simple yes or no thing. And I don't envy anybody who has to make these decisions, because they are very complicated.
I agree with you 100%. And this is what we're trying to get to the bottom of. So I did want to read. So those of you that don't follow the 06 Legacy, if you follow them on Facebook, they are it's the Following the Legacy of Wolf 06. From American Wolf, and they do a lot of posting about wolf rights. And again, your emails, your questions, your comments, anything you guys want to ask, you know, we're here. We respond as quickly as we can. We actually, believe it or not, pretty busy with helping with the Wolf Sanctuary and Stephen running around doing his thing. So the 06 Legacy is on Facebook. If you follow them, they were the ones, and I knew they would have it. So this is as of February 3rd. They posted that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has initiated its 12-month status review of the western gray wolf, the agency said in a letter sent Monday to interested parties. Last summer, ahead of controversial wolf hunts planned in Montana and Idaho, conservation groups filed 2 petitions with the Fish and Wildlife Service calling for emergency relisting of the species. The agency announced in September that the petitioners' concerns about the threat of hunting were credible enough for it to initiate a full status review. So that is a quote from the 06 Legacy on Facebook. I don't know if they have an Instagram page. So that is something that's going to happen. They are going to initiate. I know 12-month review is a lot. There could be many more wolves killed in that period of time, but I feel as though there is momentum. Those that are pro-wolf and that are looking for a reevaluation of these measures, this is good news. So, and hopefully we can, as Stephen and I always promote, get back to a more balanced approach at looking at these measures and understanding the full ecological, economical, and personal behavioral impact that we're doing. Again, really to this one species here and what it means. And this is, again, what Stephen was saying, this is the basis of our podcast, is that it's the wolf connection, and that we are connected for tens of thousands of years with this species, and we continue to try and find a balance, and hopefully we'll be able to do that. So this is our first go around with this. Everybody, those of you out there, please give Stephen a round of applause, because he did. Dude, you did a great job getting all this stuff together, and I was just piggybacking off you with all the articles. But again, we're going to do this more often. So please, if you have any, look at listen to some of the episodes that we promoted there. Again, just a profound thank you to all of you out there. And we'll be back again soon to do this. And maybe I'll jump in and do some research and help Stephen out next time. But this is great,
good, man.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, for that. It was good. And how's to all of you out there? And we will talk to you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the donate tab, and find out more information.